Welcome to the March meeting of the Fauquier County Special Education Advisory Committee. We do not have a quorum this evening, so we will be following the agenda, but we will not be taking action on motions. We will postpone approval of the February meeting minutes to our next meeting. I don't believe there's any public comment tonight, so we will move straight into the presentation from Ms. Gum on the 2025 Special Education Annual Plan. And I will just note that statute requires that the plan be presented to the Seac. It was presented because of the way our meetings fall. The first presentation was made to the school board, but it is still open for revisions until the final approval by the school board. This committee does not take action on it. We are to review it. We can provide input on it, but we don't have to approve it, so we don't have an issue that we don't have a quorum for this.
All right, are we good?
You're good.
Right. So first, when I start through the plan, I want to talk about...
Oh, just the mic.
Oh.
Talking to the mic.
That might help, right? I want to talk about the various special education funding sources, so people know this is not the only funding source. There's a variety of funding sources. So the first one is this IDEA Part B, 611 and 619. 611 is for K through 12, 619 is preschool. So that is the first part, and we're required as an LEA, including all LEAs in the division, or in the state, and the Virginia School for Deaf and Blind are required to propose an annual plan. It's supposed to be submitted to the school board and then also to the Seac. And as you stated, it was in reverse just because of when our meetings are. Let's see. All right, the next slide just gives the definition code. So when we're putting in money for reimbursement through this grant, it has to meet one of the codes. So I thought it might be important to describe what each of those codes are. So on this page is 1,000 through 5,000. First one being salaries, 2,000 being benefits. 3,000 is purchased services, which means services from private or other public contractors, including private transportation. And if we had a child at the Virginia School for Deaf and Blind, we currently do not at this time. 4,000 is internal services, which is charges from an internal service fund to other activities or elements of the local government. 5,000 are other charges, and this would include copiers, telecommunications, postage, utilities, anything like that. We go on, 6,000 are materials and supplies. There's a lot of it that comes out of that. So that's to make sure that we're taking care of what we need for our students, our staff. 7,000 is payment to joint operations. This includes tuition payments to the fiscal agent for operations that are jointly operated by 2 or more local governments. An operation is defined as jointly operated if the local governments have responsibility of ownership and policy making. Policy making may be handled directly by the local governing bodies or indirectly through an appointed board. 8,000 is capital outlay. That would mean your technology, hardware, infrastructure, replacements, additions, things like that. And 9,000 is other use of funds, and typically that area you would contact the state, work through what that means before you would apply for that area. All right, so those were the definition codes. This section talks about the appropriate use of special education funds. So the state gives us guidelines of what we should be able to spend those funds for. There's always outlying factors that we can contact the state and see what will fall suit under there. So for example, you have adaptive equipment, assistive technology, child find, classroom furniture, computers, diagnostic services, structural materials, integration, local coordination, related services, outdoor equipment, parent services, program evaluation, salaries, staff development, transition, and transportation, but this is not your public regular transportation. Okay? Stop me if you have any questions. So the other funding sources that we were talking about, one of those is state funds are made available to school divisions to assist in the cost of implementing the state special education program standards. The next one, this is one that you have to apply for, and it happens every August, September. By the end of September, has to be submitted, but this one is intensive support services. These are also state funds. They're available to school divisions that claim the reimbursement for certain cost-based services provided to students that meet the criteria as students with intensive support needs. These funds are provided in addition to the state funds referred to above when a school division has an approved students with intensive support needs application on file with VDOE. And so what happens, you send in your application. After you've submitted all of that, they take a review, they contact me, we kind of walk and talk through it. Once you've had that, then you get your official letter for approval. But the payments are backlogged, so it takes a little bit to get one, and then you get another, and then the rest of it is kind of like funneled through the remainder of the following fiscal year. So that one's a little slower getting payments into us.
And these are for specifically identified students, individual students?
They
who
are. They have
very
to
high
meet the
dollar needs.
criteria that goes with this application. They are our most needy children who have services above and beyond other students and above what our cost expenditure is for students. Their costs are well above that, and we only get that difference. Okay. Local school boards determine how much local funding to request from the governing body. And then school divisions may also seek federal Medicaid reimbursement for certain students and services by applying for the Virginia Department of Medical Assistance Services to be approved provider. We do that here in Fauquier County, and that's why you will get at the annual IEP the request to bill Medicaid. Parents have the right to say yes or no, and then it all goes through our office. That's big part of Ms. Moore's job over there is to work through all those pieces, but that is a good funding source for us, and we will continue to use that avenue as long as it's there for us. There is one other source of income that is not granted through the special education office, but it does involve our students, so I wanted to make sure that we had listed this one as well. Children placed in our private special education schools are funded through an interagency pool which exists under the Children's Services Act, or FAPT, to pay the student's share of the cost of services for children who are in or at risk of out-of-home placement by any local public agency. So this covers a range of students. Sometimes it's done by the IEP team, sometimes it's parentally placed, sometimes it's DSS placed, but those funds are given to students with special education, but they are not through our office. They are through the CSA office.
And those services are always provided outside of the school division, correct?
Are those
Outside of our school division?
Yes, that's correct.
So outplaced?
Yes, residential, things like that, yes. Okay. When we consider purchases for this grant, we are always looking at student data, including positive or negative trending, as vital to the pathway of those expenses. We're always prioritizing our expenditures. We're reviewing both of the above periodically, so not just the beginning of the year, here's where we are. We're constantly looking to make sure throughout the school year that we're appropriately spending. We research our variances of cost before making purchases, and then we're considering what is the benefit of student and each purchase as it relates to the student and their IEP. Okay. Stakeholders. So stakeholders in this process are our parents, of course, our teachers and administrators, our related service providers, school division finance department, Seac, of course, and then the school board. All right, so this talks about the nitty-gritty of our plan for this year. So our current plan for the 611, which we said was the K through 12, the amount that you see there, that's an amount that we are required to use when we propose for the following school year. So right now, for the 24-25, 2.6 is our approved plan for what we're spending right now. So when we put the application process in, they don't give us an amount, they tell us to use what we have, and then that amount is adjusted. We won't know that until like October, once the plan has gone through and provided and been approved. But that's where that dollar amount comes from. It's not something that we request or that we just, think about what we want. It comes from the previous year, okay? So with that being said, we are looking for the salaries and benefits for 5 special education teachers, 27 special education instructional assistants, and 1 special education supervisor. Okay, so that come out of that salaries and benefits codes that we were talking about. Then next, we'll purchase materials and supplies to cover costs for students with disabilities to access the appropriate curriculum and FAPE. FCPS will purchase materials and supplies needed to create a living skills lab in a school setting. That's something new that we're looking to do, that both middle and high school students who are on the aligned curriculum can access this. So what would happen is the teacher would be working towards these life skills in their classroom, and then we would have a makeshift lab skills set up at a school. They would take a CBI field trip there, and they would run through the stations in this classroom to give them the skill sets that they would need. So we're pretty excited about having that.
So this will be a shared facility for middle and high school?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you know where it's going to be at?
It will be at Fauquier High School.
Okay.
Okay, super excited about that. Dean's been a part of those conversations. So we're working through those stages of what that will look like. We're in the planning stages right now, making sure, maintenance and all those pieces have what we need in order to adapt the classroom. But super excited about that. Also provide professional development for special education teachers at the middle and high schools for reading at a tier 3 level, because as you know, VLA will be going into middle schools, so we're trying to keep up with what that looks like through the special education lens as well. So we will purchase materials needed for the teachers and students requiring this level of support, along with the training that may need to occur with that. We will utilize contract services to cover costs for contracted related service providers, transportation for specific day placement students. We'll access other services for rental fees such as copiers, postage, those kinds of things. Also cover the cost of travel for a nationwide conference for the special education supervisors and myself. And we will purchase 40 iPads to support students with disabilities per the IEP. Even though students have devices, the iPads, because of the AT team and the devices that they need and the access they need for those things, the iPad usually works better. And so we're always trying to make sure that we have our inventory where it needs to be as we go through the year. Okay? So that's what we are covering for the 611. 619 is much smaller, and again, this number comes from the 24-25 school year. Again, this is for preschool. So this amount will be used towards the preschool supervisor's salary and benefits. Then there's a section called Set Aside Apportionment Funds for both 611 and 619. There is a calculator worksheet that we go through, and when we plug things in, it comes up with the amounts that they are to be. And so for the 611, which again pre-K through or K through 12 is the $41,000, and that will be used towards contracted speech pathologists who support students requiring speech services through an ISP. So when we have parents who are requesting the ISP, we have a virtual contract provider who provides those services, and that money goes towards her salary.
And to clarify, that's K-12.
Yes, ISPs are K-12.
And
This is not pre-K.
these would be students in private schools or in homeschool
That's correct.
settings.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. All right, and so then the grant, the PS set aside for 619 is much smaller, again, $6,364. We're using this towards something a little different this year. We have many preschool students who do not come into the school even though they have an IEP. Parent may want to keep them in the home setting, or they might want to keep them in a private school, preschool setting. So our teachers from our classrooms, when their day ends, they are going out to provide that service. And so we have never, and we want to move in this direction because we have such an influx at this point. We want to be able to provide them mileage reimbursement when they're going from the school that they're at to that home or to that private. So we will use that set aside for that purpose.
Do you have an idea about how many students are served in private preschools?
Caught me off guard. Let me think for a minute. I want to say when we were doing our December 1 count and things, I want to say there was maybe 20 to 30 is probably maybe an accurate reflection of that. Okay. So you guys were provided copies of the PowerPoint and actually the application itself. At the school board meeting, I did not go over the application. This was an overview. So at this point, if you have questions or comments about the PowerPoint or about the application that you saw, I'm open to any of those questions for you.
No, I guess, so you kind of highlighted what the differences were in priorities, funding-wise, from previous years. So I love the idea of the life skills lab. It's incredible for them to have that hands-on experience, and I know it can be very expensive to set one up. So I'm really excited about that. Any other major shifts in priorities for funding that you're seeing?
And again, this is just for that one
for that
funding stream, right?
Yep.
Right. So I think that's a big piece because we need to work towards that. The VLA moving into the middle school, that's a big piece, and we know, for Department of Instruction, but also There's sometimes parameters for that Tier 3 instruction that we have to look at. So I don't know any details, but I project it to put it in there because we had a backside cost when we were doing VLA for this year
Yep.
for the lower guys. So now we know there might be something, so it's in there. Have no idea how much, but it's projected to be in there. So those right now are our big pieces, just making sure that we're doing. And then always just looking to see materials and supplies that our children need. You know, we have an influx of a couple of kiddos moving into the division, can send your costs way up. I'll tell you another big influx in things is the VAP criteria form. It has been a really big event this year. We are looking, many children will be changing placements, and they will be moving back to their base school. We'll have to be very creative in what that's going to look like, but if a child doesn't meet that VAP criteria tool, they have to be on the general curriculum. They can't be on the aligned curriculum unless there's some parent, meetings that happen and occur. So very cognizant of what that looked like. And so we may have to restructure some classrooms, so there may be some funding with that will go along with making sure that they're getting what they need as they move forward.
My only other question, so the one salary for sped supervisor, are we adding an additional, or is that already existing?
No, it's already
Okay.
existing. Yeah, it had always been put in there that
Yeah.
it would cover for one, so we just left it at that, but no additional.
Darn.
I would like to have another additional, let's talk about that. So that's another day, another discussion, but yeah.
I just want to say, because this has come up at the Seac before, I'm very pleased to see the Tier 3 support for middle school and high school special ed teachers, especially for those kiddos who are in self-contained classrooms. They may have goals. I mean, I guess there are kids outside too who may, but goals that are still decoding and goals that would be typically at a primary or elementary level. So that training is really
Yeah.
important. And we're kind of in a weird middle land because there's no estimate on when they're going to have new VSOLs to align with the VLA. And so teachers are going to be pulled in a couple different directions. So it'll be really important for them to have that.
Yeah, and some
science
things may look
reading.
different than what they've ever looked before, and it doesn't mean there's right or wrong, it just means we're in a different place. So we need people to be open-minded and be there to support them in best interest of our children.
And
Because
we
know
have,
we're
now we have
moving
the
in different
resources,
directions.
but at least they'll have the training so they'll know
Yes,
what that looks like.
yeah,
No, I think it looks great.
thank you.
I do too. and I
Anything
have no
else?
Other comments?
Okay.
Now, hopefully all the grant funding will come through and. we'll have
That's the
money
other
that
question.
we plan to spend. Thank you
Uh-huh.
very much. So I think we've pretty much had the discussion, if anyone has anything to add before we move on, but this would be the place to say if there's a concern or anything else, and I think the consensus is, and I think you can share with the school board that everybody who was here, the consensus is that we're on board with this without taking formal action. Okay, reports. Seac Chair, that's me. First, I want to commend Riley Riahi, who is a fifth grader at PB Smith, for her awesome, poster, winning poster. This is choose to include down here. She was recognized at the school board meeting. She was recognized in her classroom. And anyone who has a chance, I encourage you to take a look at the video of the school board meeting because she does make a few remarks and it was quite lovely. So congratulations to Riley. Our next two meetings will be work sessions, and what we mean by that, those are still formal SEAC meetings. They're not live streamed because they're a little bit more informal in terms of conversation because we'll be working on drafting our annual report and our recommendations. They're still open to the public, and we take public comment at all of our meetings. So if anyone who's watching the live stream here has any comment to submit, that can be done in person at the meeting or in writing via email. And we would sure appreciate any input people have before we start writing the recommendations. Also, I will be sending out an email to our current list and maybe doing, as part of our meeting announcement for next time, just a reminder to people that we're taking applications for the next school year cycle for members of the SEAC. Technically, the term begins October 1st, but as a practical matter, we usually kind of have that turnover over the summer, so we'll want to get that information to the school board. So applications are available if you email seac@fcps1.org. I will be glad to answer questions, have a conversation about what it entails, and get applications out to people. We plan to, based on conversations I've had with pretty much everyone involved, the plan is to move our meetings to back to first Thursdays for 25, 26. We'll have formal action on that probably at our next meeting. But if anyone has any input on that, please share that as soon as possible. We also probably need to look at our bylaws. I was at the state Seac, and I'll report on that in just a minute, but we had a trainer come in, and one of the things that he really stressed was how important it is that we have our bylaws up to date, that's something that the committee develops and decides how it's going to be run, and then that we really stick to those. And I think we've done a pretty good job. The area where we probably need to be firm things up a little bit is in terms of membership and how many meetings you can miss and how that all works. So this year, we haven't had anyone removed for non-attendance, and we won't make any changes in the last 2 meetings, but that's something we need to address before our next cycle starts. And I'll just go ahead and do state Seac while I'm going through this, and we'll do the other reports. This will be my final Seac meeting. My term ends in June, but we don't have another meeting before then. This is the end of my 3-year term. And I just wanted to mention, this is also the last meeting of our cycle, so the annual report goes to the State Board of Education in July, August timeframe. Recommendations that came out of this they're pending full Seac approval, but I don't anticipate them being changed. But the policy committee recommended doing things at the state level to increase participation in the paraeducator training. There's a statewide paraeducator training that last year, I think it had 3,000 slots, and there were only like 400 participants. So encouraging the state to look at what the reason is for that shortfall, and looking at doing incentives, including possibly stipends for some of their training programs for paras. So watch that space. I think a lot of it, too, was just advertising and making sure that folks were aware. I think they sent out emails to administrators and to principals, but that didn't always process into people actually participating. We looked at age ranges in self-contained classrooms. I don't think this is really a huge issue in our division, but there are some divisions where they have K through 8th graders in the same classroom, and it's a big concern for the folks who are from those areas. Additional training and professional development opportunities, especially for gen ed and special ed teachers, on things like co-teaching, universal design for learning, and other strategies for working in inclusive settings, especially with the change in the VAP assessment tool. And there are a lot of resources, and there are a lot of resources at the state level that the state is paying for. So really kind of diving into that and doing the research. We're part of a lot of nationwide consortiums at the state level, and a lot of that information is free to school divisions. So just getting the word out and encouraging the state to get the word out. Also, we've really worked hard at trying to encourage the state to expedite full licensure for provisionally licensed teachers. It's taking forever for the state to finish the licensing for people who have submitted all the paperwork, and they're just sitting waiting, and they're not getting paid as fully licensed teachers. So trying to figure out how to get those things loose from DOE. And then also transitions from pre-K to kindergarten, elementary school to middle school, and middle school to high school for students in self-contained classrooms, ensuring that the LRE is actually always being considered first, even if that is not the ultimate placement the team decides on. And the recommendation is to ensure that there's at least one member of the team present from the school that they would attend otherwise, so that school is always familiar with the student. And like as you said, we have students now transitioning back to the student, their neighborhood school. But in a lot of cases, those students and parents have never really been there. They're not as familiar with the school. So we want to make sure that the schools that students would otherwise attend are always aware of who their gen ed students are, even if they are placed somewhere else. And those were the big recommendations that came out of the state Seac meetings. So let's go.
All right. Wanted to let you guys know the book that you gave us, I Want to Go to School. Our office bought 11 copies. We bought 11 copies, and we're donating them with a little tag inside to each of the elementary school libraries from the special education office. So they're right now sitting on our table, and we'll get those out in the very near future.
Wonderful.
Projections and classroom changes across elementary. Our office is doing a lot of projections and looking at the VAP and who is identified and who's not. And so we are moving index cards and everything else we can to make sure we have things where they are. But we will be contacting parents the first week of April so that they're aware of what's going on. Our office is doing that so that we can have that full conversation with them. I'm sure most parents will be fine. The big thing that we're looking at is adjusting. We got northern side heavy on programs and not as many programs in the south end of the schools, primary of elementary. So we're trying to make that focus and that shift back. We're looking at transportation not being so long for some of those students. So we've shifted some programs just due to various reasons, and then we're taking a look to see if we can get students back either to their base school or back close to their area, so we're not having all those transportation rides being so long. So that's why our office is going to make those calls. We've always done that in the past, but I think it'll be a positive from most everyone, but I think it's time that we take a look at that. So we're doing that.
Great.
Mr. Napolitano and I attended the Disability Awareness Poster Contest at the school for the little one as well as at the school board meeting. Job fair, we were there as well and looked for vacancies. Could have been maybe a little better turnout, but it was good. We had some conversations. And as Ms. Brown had announced, there were some offers made then and some offers that have been made since. So moving forward, we're trying to get some of those positions filled. This week currently, and for the next couple of weeks, the VAP testing is currently going on, being implemented, so I'm working through those. And then our SPED training day, which is always the week we return in August, we have a day, and on that day, we will be doing 2 objectives. One is we're going to have our school board attorneys from Sands and Anderson coming in and going back to some of the basics of what SPED law is. We have so many new teachers, it's been a while since we've done anything like that. So we're going to bring them in for a couple of hours to go over some things and answer questions that people may have, just so they understand how important the regulations are and what happens when we don't, and what that can ultimately do for the division. So that's an important piece to have. And then also we'll be doing some training. We're working through what that training is going to look like for the rest of that day, probably in shifts again, and they'll be able to select based on what they do. We know that one training for all in special ed does not work these days. You have too many grade levels, too many content areas, so we'll be looking for what that training does.
Great.
Right?
Let's go down to the PRC.
I just have some final numbers for you, and I sent it to you.
We like numbers.
We had a total of 62 vendors come to the fair, 28 of which were specifically related to disability services. We had 2 high schools and 3 middle school unified basketball teams represented. Rough estimate on attendance was over 200. We had 360 people walk through, but we counted vendors as we were looking.
Let me just say, I think you should count vendors as participants, because every single vendor who was there walked around and got information from other people. So when I gave the report to the state Seac, I certainly included everybody, because I think that was a huge benefit. that we could.
324, you said?
360.
60.
It was a home run,
360.
so.
So will we plan on conjoining that from now on?
Started a little.
There were so many parents who came over
It was fabulous.
to talk to both to the, I was with kind of between the ARC and the SEAC, and there were so many parents who came over who clearly their kids hadn't even been identified yet, but they were young and they knew there was something going on, and all I could think was, these are not parents who would ever have shown up for a disability event, but they were there and they were moving around. No, I thought it was great. So, yeah.
Back at it.
Look forward to next year. I think it's
My kids loved it.
well, and that was fun too.
Yep.
There was stuff for the kids.
There was
to
a
do.
lot of nice things. Yeah.
Great. Any, Mr. Napolitano, you got anything to?
I think the only thing I want to share is there's a lot of talk about our staff has expressed some concerns, and there's a lot of talk about the cuts that are happening in the
Yeah.
government.
Do you want to speak into a microphone?
Is this good here? Okay.
Okay.
We have not been affected by it as of yet in any way, meaning that no one said that we're not getting our federal funds. Our overall budget is about 3 to 4% from federal money. The rest is local or state. So we haven't, as far as funds go, it hasn't affected us in any way, or nor have we been told that will affect us in any way. However, as of yesterday, there was a large number of employees in those departments that had lost their jobs. The other thing that I just want to make sure everyone is aware of, that the Department of OCR, Office of Civil Rights, is in the Department of Education. And that department itself lost about half of their employees. And so I share all that because everything, as far as, I don't think there's going to be any issues with like money and distribution, because there's other areas in the government that will, file that through, but like paperwork and things like that will probably have a massive delay. And that's my opinion, no one's told me that, but.
I second it because I actually talked to one of our school board attorneys today about something else with OCR, and we were having a conversation, and she said at this point, everything's just gonna, there's no sense in reaching out to anyone, it's just kind of leave things live right now to figure out what's gonna happen. So.
And they already had a tremendous backlog. And just to be clear, OCR handled complaints under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which can affect students with IEPs and 504 plans, but they don't specifically deal with IDEA.
Correct. So I say all that because we haven't been affected in any way. However, I think there will be kind of a delay in maybe informational things, but I don't think as of right now there's any issue with funding.
But just to clarify, I assume it's the policy of our school division that we'll continue to enforce OCR
Oh, of course.
policy,
Yeah.
just like we.
It's still law.
Regardless.
Everything's still like
Still the law,
so
yep.
we're still following everything. I just say that more so just so that people have an understanding. I don't think people realize that maybe OCR fell in that Department of Education, because it's all, when you receive information from them, it's very, legal in nature.
It looks
And
like
so
it would be the
looks like-
Department of
Yeah.
Justice.
Correct,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it's split
So,
between education and labor, depending on what the
So,
piece
but
is.
it is enough. That's all.
No, thank you. Actually, while you're at it, we talked about this a little before, but if you could just go over the increases in the budget recommendations, the superintendent's budget, and where we're at with that?
Yeah, so it's a little, you got to hang with me here a little bit, just because, in the February board meeting, Dr. Warner presented his budget, his proposed budget to the board. And the highlights of that, for the most part, that the people want to hear about is, he recommended a 4% raise across the board for all employees, and then there were some groups that he had recommended additional percentage to, some of our classified employees that may be, lacking compared to some of the other counties. So we were trying to close that gap. At that meeting, the board said, our school board said they wanted to do 4% across the board, 6% for certain groups, and then 8. So it was 4, 6, 8 were the numbers.
And mention the special education teachers.
The
Yeah.
stipend.
And then there was a $7,500 increase.
It's not a stipend.
Yeah, because it'll be part of their salary. So a
Okay.
$7,500 increase for all 34 of our self-contained classrooms, whether they're a current teacher or that we hire them new.
And that only applies to people who are actually receiving it, teacher, like provisionally licensed or licensed teachers.
Anyone
All.
who, so some of those classrooms this current year had lead IAs because we did not have a teacher. So whoever is either the teacher or the lead will get that $7,500.
So an IA could get the $7,500. Now, presumably, we're working to
That's correct.
fill those teaching
It will
positions.
remain open until filled.
Would that IA then lose the $7,500?
Yes, it would be
It'd
prorated.
be prorated.
And so when the new teacher would come in, they would, the lead IAs, that 7,500, whatever they've gotten would stop, and then whatever's left, that new teacher coming in would get the rest of it.
Okay.
Depending on when they start. And then there was also an additional $80,000 specifically designated for the special education budget. Fast forward to the Board of Supervisors, the county commission, is it commissioner? Yeah. Administrator, county administrator presented her budget, and in her budget, she only, she gave us half of what the request was from Dr. Warner's budget. So he requested an additional 2.8. She, in her budget, gave 1.4. Based on that, Dr. Werner went back to our board on this past Monday and aligned our budget with what she presented, so that if the Board of Supervisors approves it, then our budget would be good. When he did that, he had to adjust the salary increases from 468 to 357.
But there was no impact on the special ed
No impact on
specific.
anything else related to spend. So no impact on the money that's going to be for the self-contained teachers, and no impact to the $80,000. I say all that, and the reason why I said hang with me here is because the Board of Supervisors needs to approve their budget, and then our school board can approve. Our school board can approve ours, but it doesn't mean anything if the Board of Supervisors doesn't approve theirs. And so over the next month, you'll see a lot of back and forth probably. There's, I think there's a joint meeting next week, and so it's usually not all said and done until the end of April-ish. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So there's a possibility it could go back to 468. It's just, right now, that was just a proposed budget from the county administrator, and Dr. Warner felt, well, if that's what she's proposing, let's make our budget in line with that, so that we can then kind of go from there. But the Board of Supervisors ultimately, they may, I'm not saying they're going to, but they may not even approve the 1.4 that she recommended, and then we kind of go back to the table. Or they may say, you know what, let's meet the schools halfway, and we're going to give 2 million instead of 2.8. You know, so it's just, it's a matter of kind of conversations at this point between all parties.
We're also waiting for the governor to sign the state, right?
Correct. And so then the governor, we were hoping that, I think Prashant, Mr. Shrestha said, March 24th, he's supposed to sign the state budget, and so there could be additional funding in there as well. And then that would obviously play into what our budget looks like as well.
Okay, great.
Sorry if that was long-winded.
No, I think that's extremely helpful. And I had hoped tonight that we could talk about possibly doing a letter from the Seac, but since we don't have a quorum, we cannot do that. If we get to our April meeting and that's something that's still on the table, and I'll check in with you and see if it would be helpful, then that may be something that we could do at that time. In the meantime, individual members of the Seac and parents who are concerned about funding for special education certainly can provide input, especially to their Board of Supervisors member, if that's something they so desire to do. That brings us to the calendar. March 21st is World Down Syndrome Day, which is Crazy Sock Day. I didn't see anything in this week's newsletter, so hopefully there'll be something in next week's newsletter. Check in on that. And then World Autism Day is April 2nd. We have our next meeting on April 10th, and then another meeting on May 9th. My hope is that on April 10th, we can frame all of the issues that we want to address in the annual report. A lot of the annual report is summarizing what happened this year and stuff that doesn't really require action by the committee, just final approval. But then by May 9th, we'll have a final document to sign off on and present to the school board. So I think, are there any questions about what we're doing before the end of the year? Unlike the schools, we'll be done in May. Just got that email saying we're having class in June. All right, and then the only other thing I believe that you have something that you want to
Bring to the round table?
Yeah, and so I think this is just, we talked about this, members of the Seac don't make public comment because they're members of the committee, but this is basically the equivalent of a public comment, and there won't be any discussion tonight, but you consider this when we consider our recommendations at our next meeting.
So, thank you very much for taking the time to listen. So, I would like to make a suggestion in terms of looking at what our current methods are in completing student observations. It's my understanding that some of the technology we use, the VHS recorders that are, they look like they're from 1994. They could put tripod, is that correct? But
Just go ahead and do your
Okay.
I'll
remarks, and then we can.
Okay, I'm
when we have
sorry.
it. No, it's okay, when we have a discussion about it. then we'll-
Okay, so, so I feel like the equipment is probably very old, it's large, it's kind of invasive. So it seems intrusive and distracting that the technology has now gotten smaller and less obstructive, that we could look at something that may be able to do that. I was also interested in the possibility of utilizing Zoom with a confidentiality setting. If we were utilizing therapists or medical professionals on the observation. So that was something that I would like for us to discuss further. Let's see here. I do feel like providing the less obstruction we have in the environment, the more we're going to see the natural behavior that's going on that we're trying to find and look at. So I do think that there may possibly be times when an extra administrative staff member should be present if there have been previous concerns about a person's behavior in a classroom situation. But otherwise, I feel like if a parent would like to do an observation, they should have the ability to do that with just a teacher, without an administrator present. And then I definitely feel if you have a medical professional, mental health, therapist, or a doctor of some sort, they are licensed in the state. They have background checks, and they actually also have the confidentiality and the HIPAA laws that they are prone to. If they could provide their current appropriate license, it would be a lot better to have just the one person in there with the teacher as opposed to that person plus an administrator. It just seems like a lot more activity that we have the ability to talk about and maybe reduce to get a little more accurate information in our observations.
Yeah. So I will look into, because, excuse me, many of the observations we're doing these days, if we are doing those observations virtually, we are simply using laptops. So we have whoever's doing the observation, our camera, our speaker is off, so that the child that we're observing can't see us.
Right.
So there would be then a laptop in the classroom and a conspicuous place targeted towards that child.
Okay.
So I will make sure that we're all kind of doing that. Maybe there was
Okay.
someone that didn't know that, so that was a little surprising when you said that. But we'll work on making sure that that's a little less conspicuous than, as you said, a tripod that we used to use back in the day doing that.
Okay, because I've seen them
Yeah.
still being used. Thank you.
Okay, we'll work on that. I wasn't aware of that. My thought would be, when you have either a parent or you have a licensed medical professional coming in to do an observation, I don't think it's a question of that person being able to do it. I think if the teacher's the only one in the room, the teacher's not being able to observe what you're observing. So we need to have a school staff person observing, because in case there's something in question, we need someone who's going to be able to see the same thing you did so that we can address it. So if the teacher is in the room and they're teaching the class, they're not watching what's going on. So
But the teacher is not the one responsible for the observation. It would be the medical professional, and it would be because of their expertise in that area that they would be trusted to do
Yeah, I'm not
that. And then
saying-
they would be also trusted if they had a question further to maybe ask. But I don't see.
I see it that, well, yes, they are fully trusted, but if someone in the school division is not there to see what they're seeing, how do we be able to problem solve or have a
How do you
discussion?
believe,
if we
how
never
can you
saw
trust
it?
them?
I
I mean,
said-
that's where I'm.
No, no,
Okay.
no. If you need someone who's in the division who can see the same thing. Two people have to have the same observation. if you have just the parent or just one, because you have, I can't, how do I have someone that's gonna be able to help resolve it or figure out what's going on if you don't have a school staff in there doing the observation with them?
I guess I don't
Mr.
understand that
Sullivan?
because
Well-
the professional would be the one to
I
provide.
guess
the
I don't, like, what is the concern about having, an administrator?
Well, if you have 24 children in a classroom plus a teacher, and then you have an observer, and then you want to stuff an administrator in there as well, it becomes extremely, it's disruptive.
And
But
that's
we
why a
know.
And
virtual
that's
option
why
is a
we
good idea.
choose to do the
With,
virtual option.
absolutely, and usually that's possible, but sometimes it is not. And when it is not, it would be better to have as little or as less disruption as possible. And I guess what I don't understand is the person observing the child would be directly observing the child. So, even if there were two people in there, they could potentially sneeze and close their eyes and miss whatever happened. That's not, as a professional, I think they should be trusted with their opinion.
So we're in two different, so now we're in two different scenarios, so,
I know you say that you do. I get.
well, we have two different scenarios, because necessarily a parent wouldn't be a professional, right? So,
Well, I'm talking about only professionals
well, I
under
thought you
this.
said when a parent.
No, I was saying that I think parents should be allowed in there to observe their child on their own unless they have shown some sort of a conduct that could potentially be disruptive. And then the school would have a possibility to say no. With someone who is a professional, they're there specifically for their professional opinion about what is happening and how to best address that problematic behavior. That is their training, that's their licensure. I just feel like it creates so much more disruption to add another person, especially when we have these tiny rooms and a lot of students. It's unnecessary, it's over the top, I think it takes away from their time for other things. I think there will be a lot
May I
of-
share a teacher perspective? I know I'm not our teacher rep, Amy, is that okay for me
Yes,
to
go
speak
right
with
ahead.
teacher hat? So for me, right, as a teacher, I've had plenty of parents come in for observations. I've done observations as a parent of a child with disabilities, right? I've always had an administrator there. As a teacher, for me, that's important for me because like Angie said, I don't see every single thing that's happening at every single moment. I have 25 children in my classroom, right? And so my administrators are in and out of my classroom constantly. Actually, mine was in there for my whole social studies block yesterday because she was there to watch an acting activity that we were doing for a review for Revolutionary War. So it's not disruptive to my students at all when my administrator comes in because they should be commonly in the classroom and they should be regularly stepping foot into their students' classrooms throughout the day. If that's not happening, then it may be a distraction, and then maybe we talk about the other end of that. Well, how do we get that to not be a distraction so that students are used to their administrators coming in constantly? But as a teacher who understands that sometimes things can be perceived differently by different people, and in our current state and law, as a teacher, we are upheld to a very high standard in our community. And if somebody goes and says something publicly negatively about us, it can impact our careers greatly because under Supreme Court law, if we are not meeting the expectations of the community, we can be let go from our job. Not saying that any teacher would, but so for me personally, having an administrator there just makes me feel comfortable. And it makes me feel like I can do my job in the exact way that I would always do my job, only because with today's day and age and Facebook and what parents are saying about teachers publicly makes me as a teacher very uncomfortable, to be very honest and straightforward. And I don't think I'm doing anything wrong in my classroom at all. I love my students more than anything in this world, but we are judged very harshly.
And you believe that a professional mental health or healthcare provider doing an observation?
I don't know that person. I don't know their credentials. There are plenty of mental health.
That would be, they would be breaking confidentiality law and they would lose their license.
And those
That's
things happen.
illegal.
They do lose their licenses though, and it does happen.
Well, and it also happens that teachers abuse students in classrooms, but that doesn't mean that you should be linked into them, and I understand that. We need to have respect and assume that most people who go into their professions do it because they want to help children, do it because they want to help those who have disabilities. And I can tell you from my own experience with certain disabilities, it is extremely distracting and can cause more problems to have all of that disruption. I just don't see what the point is.
So-
So I think, well, this is something I think that you all can put in, if this is something that you all want to do, then you can put it in there. I think that's the purpose of.
So I was going to ask, I think we've had a lot of different issues come up around observations this year. From how do you get an observation, the forms, in-person versus virtual observations, just in general parent access to the classroom, access for professionals, for independent observations, what those kind of parameters are. And I think we're almost certainly going to do some kind of recommendation in this space. I think the first thing that I would ask all the members to do, and I'll put this, we'll make sure it's in the minutes, but if people could get back with sort of their list of concerns to me so that I can get that to staff before our next meeting. So if there are, especially if there are any questions about how it's done throughout the division. I mean, the first thing that came to mind in what you were saying is if somebody's doing an observation and they get to the point where they need to leave the classroom, you have a visitor in the school, all visitors are escorted in the school just for safety reasons. And the teacher's not really in a position to deal with walking them back to the office or whatever. So, parents aren't roaming around schools either. So I think there are a lot of different issues, and they may come into play in security, they may come into play in special education. But if we can get that list of what are all the different concerns, and if any parents who are listening or watching the video or teachers could share those as well to the main Seac email address, I'll compile a list before the next meeting. We'll get that out, because obviously we have to have recommendations on, well, hopefully we will, on more than just observations. So I don't want to take a whole meeting with that, but hopefully we can do some research ahead of time so we can answer questions and then make some recommendations. I think there probably are different issues for kids being observed in gen ed classrooms than in very small self-contained classrooms. So maybe kind of addressing how that works and how often it's an issue. I think all that would be helpful. So if everybody could get that to me, we'll have yours already in the minutes. But I think different people have had different problems or different things that they're concerned about. So everybody good with that? All right, let's do that for our next meeting.
Thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
And I think too, Ms. Gum and Mr. Napolitano, if you are aware of things that just keep kind of coming up as parents having concerns about things, because it is important that parents are involved in the process of knowing what their kids are doing in classrooms. And that's easier for some kids. The kids that come home and give you the 3-hour story about what happened at school are a little easier to do that with than the kids who can't tell you what happened during the day. So, fantastic. Well, there's that. Did you have anything in the round table that you would like to mention?
No.
All right. I would ask for a motion to adjourn, but we can't
Yes,
vote on
motion.
it, so thank you everyone for coming.